Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. Americans like to spend, and never is that more evident than when we look at consumer debt, and every single year it takes a little bit of an uptick. Now, there are a lot of different types of debt. Think mortgages, auto loans, credit cards, student loans, and also debt varies wildly based on the different life stage you're at. But in this video, we are going to go over average debt for Americans. But because there's so many different factors at play when we talk about debt, we're going to approach these averages from a lot of different angles. But nonetheless, it is important to remember that averages are just numbers. They are not indicative of any one person's individual financial journey. It is through averages that we can recognize generalized trends and patterns. It's a generic snapshot of the American consumer. But know that the average is not going to be particularly representative of you and your personal financial journey or anyone else's individual financial journey. It's just an average. It's just a number. Now let's start out with the broad view. The average American's overall debt is just north of $90,000. This number is going to include debt from every single category type. So whether it's a mortgage, a student loan, credit card debt, personal loan, whatever, it is included in this overall average. But let's break it down a little bit. First, by category, because the type of debt matters, because a mortgage isn't really comparable to credit card debt and vice versa. So breaking it down by category, average credit card debt is about $5,000. Average personal loan debt is about $16,000. Auto loan debt, $20,000. Student loans, they're about $40,000. HELOC, or home equity line of credit, where people borrow against the equity built up in their home, well, that average is about $42,000. And finally, the average mortgage debt is a little over $200,000. We have a little visitor for this portion of the video. This is Peanut. He usually sleeps during the filming of these videos, but he wanted to join in on this one apparently. Let me know if you guys have a pet down below in the comments. I am actually a huge pet lover, and dogs specifically. So let me know if you guys have a pet down below. But as I said, not all debt types are created equal. Some are better and some are worse. Well, the average American does have a credit card. In fact, 90% of all Americans have at least one credit card. And that's not a bad stat, because credit cards can be a wonderful financial tool. Credit cards can help you build up a great credit score. They are a convenient way to pay your bills or to buy things. And also they can have really cool perks like cashback offers, travel rewards, and really cool point structures. But according to Experian, 75% of all US adults carry a balance on their credit card. And that's a bad stat, because the interest rate on credit cards can be all the way up to 25%. There is no benefit whatsoever to carrying any sort of balance with a credit card. The best thing you can do for yourself is to pay it off every single month. Carry no balance whatsoever. Now let's take a look at the average credit card debt by generation. Gen Z, well, they have about $2,000 worth of credit card debt. Millennials, they have about $4,000. Gen Xers, about $7,000. Baby boomers, about $6,000. And the silent generation, well, they only have about $3,000 worth of credit card debt. The next category is personal loans, and this is really a very broad category and one of the least used categories of debt, as only 25% of all US adults have a personal loan out. Now, this category really captures anytime someone borrows a lump sum of money and pays it back in monthly installments. This money can really be used in a myriad of different ways. Perhaps you want to consolidate your debts, or maybe you wanted to start a business, or maybe an emergency arose and you just didn't have the emergency funds built up to pay for it. Well, you might need a personal loan for that. The typical interest rate on a personal loan does widely vary. It really depends on what you're using the loan for, who you're borrowing from, and what your credit score is. It could be 2% or it could be double digits, but the average is going to be somewhere around 5 to 9%. Now, one of the best ways to prevent yourself from having to take out any unnecessary loans would be to have a really good emergency fund, because a lot of people do end up turning to credit cards or personal loans if an emergency arises. So having a good solid emergency fund is always a good idea, because you don't want to be taking out any unnecessary loans, because that's just digging yourself into debt, and that's something we really don't want to do. Next up, we have auto loans, and this is the second most popular debt type, with 67% of American adults carrying some type of auto loan. And that's understandable, because a new car costs about $40,000. A used car, well, that costs about $25,000. So no matter which way you look at it, that's a pretty significant cash outlay. And most people don't have that much saved up just to buy the car outright. Now, more often than not, a car is a necessary expense, because you probably need a car to get to and from your job in order to earn a paycheck, and also to do those errands that are associated with life. So cars are often a necessary evil. So there's nothing wrong with having an auto loan. You just want to make sure that you have one that you can afford. Now, the average American does take an auto loan for 60 months or 5 years. And when it comes to a new car payment, the average is $577 a month, and one for a used car comes in at $413 a month. Now, it's really important to note that loans for cars and the interest rates associated with them are closely tied to your credit score. So having a good credit score really makes all the difference, and it can definitely go a long way into making sure that you get an affordable monthly payment. And in an ideal situation, you are actually going to get a car loan that only lasts 3 years, and that way you can have your car paid off and still drive it for long after that and not carry a payment on it. So maybe you drive your car for 10 years, but if you only had a car loan payment for 3 years, that means you're driving it for 7 years without actually having to pay anyone for it. That's a pretty good situation to be in. Next up, we have student loans, and 1/3 of all US adults carry some type of student loans. And when it comes to student loans, a lot of times I think they're a necessary evil, because education can really be a great stepping stone to better paying career opportunities. Now, in no way am I saying that universities or college educations are absolutely necessary for everyone. There are amazing trade schools that offer great career opportunities, but I am saying that often education and degrees can open doors that would otherwise not be accessible. But not all degrees are created equal. Different degrees do make more opportunities available than others, so you do have to look at what degree you are considering. Obviously, the percent of individuals with student loans is heavily weighted towards those who are younger. Also, those balances for student loan debts tend to peak when individuals are in their 30s or in their 40s, as the average age for graduates from master's and doctoral programs is about 33 years old. And it is these advanced degrees that take longer to obtain, and they're more costly to acquire. Roughly 85% of all student loan debt is held by those who are 44 years old and under. And the typical borrower for student loans will pay off their debt in 20 years' time. Now, I also think it's important to note that the type of degree you get is far more important than the actual school you go to. Once you're a few years removed from your college days, most employers do not care where you went to school. All they care about is that you are well educated. And it's generally a good rule of thumb not to rack up a student loan debt that is more than what you would anticipate making as an annual income in your first year once you graduate. Now, this may not apply to the medical field or the law field, as their incomes do start out a little bit lower in their first years, but after that they increase fairly exponentially. The next category is the home equity line of credit, and this is the least popular category, with only 12% of US adults carrying some type of HELOC. Now, the median age for a HELOC borrower is actually 50 years old, and that makes a lot of sense because it's going to generally be someone who's a little bit older that has more equity built up in their home. When you first buy your home, those early years, those payments are heavily weighted towards interest, so you're not actually paying a lot towards the principal. So you probably don't have a lot built up as equity in your home in those initial years when you first bought it. Now, I'm not a huge fan of this type of debt because I look at at your home as the roof over your head. You need a safe, secure place to live. I love the idea of paying off your home, owning it outright so no one can ever come along and take it away from you. If you borrow against all this equity that you work so hard to build up, it feels like you're taking a step backwards. So I really like the idea of paying off your home and not borrowing against it. So avoid it if you can. And finally, we have a mortgage, and this is the most popular debt type, with 44% of all US adults carrying a mortgage balance, as well as the largest debt category, which makes sense. It's a house, it's a big purchase. Now, a lot of factors go into how expensive and how much a mortgage is. And certainly where you live plays a huge factor. Cities are more expensive than rural areas, and coastal states are more expensive than the center of the country. Also, the age group with the most expensive monthly mortgage is those aged 35 to 44. And again, this makes sense because this is generally the time when people are actually buying their second home. The average person buys their second home around the age of 41, and they're probably at this point having a family, needing to upgrade and have a little bit more space. When you're starting out, you generally start with a smaller home, and when you're older in life, often many people downsize to a smaller home. And when it comes to mortgage terms, by far and away, the most popular mortgage is the 30-year mortgage, with 90% of all people going with a 30-year mortgage. So there's average debt by category, but as we said, averages can be fairly deceptive. And I did say that I wanted to approach debt, which is a pretty complex subject, from a number of different angles. So let's approach the averages from a different angle, this time going by age. Gen Z carries roughly $10,000 worth of debt. Millennials have roughly $80,000. Gen X, about $135,000 worth of debt. Baby boomers, about $97,000. And the silent generation, well, they have about $41,000 in debt obligations. Now, it's pretty typical that your debt burden is going to be the greatest when you're in the middle of your life. That's when you're acquiring the most things. Think a house, car, kids, pets. It's just a lot coming at you. When you're starting out in life, you generally don't have much in the way of debt. As you get older, you acquire more things, life's necessities, and you have to find a way to pay for them. But then as you continue to age, your debt burden does generally lessen. Now, this time, what if we were to look at debt, but instead of going by age, what if we went by education level? How would the averages look then? Well, it's not surprising to see that the more educated one becomes, the higher the debt burden they tend to carry. And the reason behind this is going to be twofold. The more schooling you go to, the greater number of student loans you're going to have to carry. For instance, the typical master's degree is going to cost anywhere from $30,000 to $120,000 on top of any undergraduate studies you did. The same with medical school, except this time those 4 years average a cost of $250,000. And the further you go with your schooling, the more likely you are to obtain a higher paying position. And the higher your pay, the more likely you are going to feel that you can afford nicer things, like a more expensive house or a fancier car. And when you buy nicer things with a higher price tag, the debt burden is going to be greater. And finally, let's look at debt by family structure. Here we see the greatest contributing factor to debt when it comes to family structure is whether you're single or whether you have children. Couples carry much more debt than single individuals, and those with children carry much more debt than those without children. Children are inherently expensive. You probably want a bigger home, you might need a bigger car, vacations are more expensive, and then there's the cost of childcare itself, and that is incredibly expensive. Family structure has a profound effect on debt levels. So how much debt is too much debt? Well, the average rule of thumb is that you don't want your debts to exceed 45% of your take-home pay. So if you make $5,000 per month, all of your debts, mortgage, auto loans, student loans, credit cards, etc., should not exceed $2,250. Remember, too much debt can quickly spiral out of control. Too much and you can feel like you're drowning. Not all debt is bad debt, but too much of any type of debt is a bad situation to be in. The most practical advice is to keep your debt burden as low as possible. The less you owe anyone else, the more in control of your life you are going to be. So what do you think of the average American and their debt loads? Let me know in the comments down below. Where do you fall? I always love continuing these conversations in the comments, so I do read and respond to all of them. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. And if you're here watching video number 2, 3, or 4 from me, please consider subscribing. I'd love to have you. Or even better yet, please consider sharing this video with someone else who might find it interesting, as it really does help the channel. I truly appreciate you guys watching. I hope you have a great week, and I will see you soon. Bye.